Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our third and final webinar in our spring series this year. It's great to see a number of you here again today, and we're very grateful, of course, for you taking the time to listen in. If you've watched the previous sessions, then well done and gold star to you. If you've not watched the previous sessions, then they are available, and I'll post a link on the Q&A section so that you can use that link to access them. Before I introduce today's speaker, my colleague Rob, just a few key points. So first of all, the presentation will last about 45 minutes, so giving you plenty of time for questions at the end. If you do have any questions throughout the presentation, please put these in the Q&A and we'll either pick them up as we go along or we'll come back to them at the end. The webinar is being recorded, and a recording of the webinar will be added to our website, but you will also be emailed a recording after today's event. We're also going to put a SurveyMonkey link into Q&A as well, and if you wouldn't mind spending just a couple of minutes at the end of the session, just giving us your feedback on the event. Obviously, when we get feedback on events like this, it really helps us to shape future presentations that we do, so we'd be really grateful if you could give us a little bit of feedback there. So I'm going to pass you over to my colleague Rob in just a second. Many of you will be familiar with Rob, but just a little bit of background on Rob. So Rob is a chartered and certified financial planner, and he's also a rare beast as he's a resolution accredited specialist, and Rob will tell you a bit more about that in his presentation and why perhaps that matters. So Rob today is going to talk about the many ways that we interact with solicitors and mediators. Many of you will know us for pension sharing reports. We do a lot more than that, but I don't think it's as widely known as perhaps it could be. And the idea of today's session really is to give you a bit more information about how we work with mediators and solicitors to help you and your clients through a very difficult time. So without further ado, I will mute myself and pass you over to my colleague Rob.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. As Jeremy says, it's the third of our sessions. This one's slightly different to the previous two. The previous two really majored on pension sharing reports, which, of course, is what a lot of you know us for. Right. So without further ado, let's scoot on to the third last slide then. So I titled the session today, Getting the Most Out of Your Financial Expert. My objectives, or the objectives for the day, is when you might engage with a financial planner, the benefits of resolution accreditation for your clients, and I'll draw it all together at the end with some summary and some conclusions. The good news for you is it's a relatively breezy run through today, how maybe as I perceive it, we as a team, and what I mean by that is us at Blue Sky and you as the representative of the separating individual, can work together for the benefit of that individual. The great news for you, I suppose, about today's presentation, two great things. Number one, no complex calculations, and number two, no test at the end. Okay. So, for the really observant amongst you who are now on their third one of the Blue Sky Spring presentations, you've seen this slide before, so my apologies to those regular viewers. Those super keen and eagle-eyed will notice that the 5 has changed into a 6 on this slide at point 1, and that's because we've got ourselves another paraplanner, or we might call them a technician, as that's describing it there, joining us next week. So the business here at Blue Sky is continuing to grow, which is great news. I will just touch on some of these other quick points. Number one, that we are a firm of chartered financial planners, not actuaries. Now, that's a statement that we've largely put in there specific to pension sharing reports, because I guess still to this day, the most predominant provider of pension sharing reports is likely to be an actuary. Financial planners who are PODs are still relatively rare, but there are a few of us around across the country, and I would perhaps suggest that there are times when an actuary is okay for the job for a pension sharing report, and there'll be times where the chartered financial planner and perhaps their experience in the wider world of finances might be of benefit. In terms of pension sharing reports, yeah, we've been doing those for a long time now. Since 2000, we got involved in this pretty much at the moment that it was possible to share a pension. And the fourth and final point is that our team, and you can see our lovely mugshots beneath, are members of Resolution, with a couple of us being accredited. To that end, before I dive into the main part of the session today, I thought I'd just share with you a couple of bits and bobs, really all around the Resolution Financial Planning Conference that occurred last month. Some of you will already have seen this month's review. There's a screenshot of it there. There's our very own Mark Pinston up there in the top right-hand corner, and I believe I'm one of the mugshots hiding down there as well. But it was a good session, and I'm really pleased to see that Resolution has made a good fuss of this in the latest version of the review. The session itself left me leaving very encouraged about the future, and those people who want to be committed to helping people go who are separating, going through divorce at what is a particularly difficult time for them. Some stats for you. There were 100 attendees at the conference. I appreciate there was some who were speakers who weren't in financial services. It probably got us down to maybe 90 that weren't. I think the big issue that still is the case, as far as experts in this field are concerned, is that there are still only 33. That was a guess. The feeling was it was somewhere in the mid-30s from those of us who were attending. There's only 33 accredited experts in the entire country. Look, I went to the conference in 2019 with Mark and with Jeremy, and in 2019 there were 22. So I suppose 11 more. That's a positive piece, but nowhere near enough would be my opinion. The session itself, the conference was actually a 2-day experience. Day one was for everybody, and day two was just for those who were accredited or those who are trying to achieve accreditation. And I think that probably that well, first of all, I thought that was a great session, the second day, but it also highlighted that some of those who are desperately trying to get to become accredited were feeling quite demoralized about the process. There was one particular very eloquent lady, very intelligent lady who was there. She was chartered as a financial planner amongst numerous other qualifications that she got, but she'd not passed her first attempt at the accreditation, and had no real explanation as to why she hadn't passed, which is not a great thing. We were lucky in the session in that we had a couple of the accredited experts were also the examination markers. And I know that they felt quite demoralized equally, because when they marked the exam, they were actually highlighting where someone was not achieving the required standards. So somewhere there's a disjoint in there, which I think we can probably work around. In fact, the consensus from the accredited Resolution experts that were at that session was that maybe at next year's conference, on the second day, we might run some hints and tips and best practice for what's required to try and increase that number more, because certainly it's my opinion that if we can increase that number of experts, that's for the benefit of everybody, and it gives you even more people with which you can make contact with to help your clients. The very last observation I got from the session, and I've used the term a niche within a niche, and what I mean by that is perhaps if we meet other financial planners, we might say all of the areas that we help our clients in, and then we might say, oh, by the way, we've got a niche that we are experts in, which is helping people through divorce. But what was evident to me was that some of the other experts just focused on specific aspects of work in divorce. So there were a few that just focused on assisting in the mediation process, others that maybe just did pension sharing reports. So to us, I found it particularly interesting because I would say that we help all across the spectrum of areas in which having a financial expert on your side would be useful in divorce. And of course, that's the subject for this session. I thought before I dive into those particular areas that I might actually start off possibly with a question that you may have, which is, okay, so I think I need a financial expert. Where should I start? Where can I go and get that advice from? Point number one, I would say, is possibly embarrassingly simple to get to, which is, well, it probably is a good start to make sure that the individual that the firm or the firm that the individual works for is actually on the FCA register. Possibly very easy and straightforward that point, but I think it is worth checking if you're doing your due diligence on a potential contact that you might work with as a financial advisor. The next point I'm going to say, let's just take one of those off. Okay, all right. The next point I was going to say is there are two types of advisors. There are independent financial advisors, IFAs, on the box in the middle. That's the middle of those boxes under the section called independent advisors. And then there are restricted advisors. To give you an example there, a restricted advisor tends to represent one company only. I guess the most high profile restricted advisor firm that's out there would be St. James's Place, whereas an IFA, an independent financial advisor, has the ability to use any provider. So let's take a pension, for example. If you go to St. James's Place, restricted advisor, you're going to end up with a pension with them. If you go to an IFA, effectively speaking, the IFA has the freedom to choose on any pension that's out. Possibly in practice, you might find IFAs have a small panel of providers that they might use rather than that they've pre-honed, but generally speaking, they've got the freedom to choose from anybody. I've added the column on the right-hand side of the slide under financial planning because it's you sometimes hear a terminology of financial planner. And to me, as a financial planner, I think it's a key differentiator. So I wanted just to flag that to you and maybe use an example. An individual wishes to or wanders into a restricted or an IFA's office, the people in the middle of this slide, and says, I tell you what, I'd really like to have a pension. And the IFA or the restricted advisor is then going to recommend a pension that they think is suitable for it. A financial planner, however, is more likely to ask another question. Really? Why do you need a pension? And the conversation might go around the following lines. Oh, well, I'd like to retire one day. The financial planner will then say, oh, that's interesting. Tell me about that. What do you think you might need as an income? When do you think you might wish to retire? In short, the financial planner will look at the wider picture. You can get IFAs who are financial planners. You can even get restricted advisors that are financial planners as well. But I wanted just to highlight on this slide the places that you might, or the terminologies that you might be looking for. I also think there are some value adds, and I know you might think, having looked at this slide, Rob's got a loaded agenda with it, but maybe if you could humour me. The value adds are as follows. I think if you were doing your due diligence and you were looking for an advisor that perhaps had spent a lot of time on making sure that they were qualified to the highest standard, then you would be looking to perhaps see that that individual is chartered. A chartered financial planner, sometimes which you might get through the Chartered Insurance Institute, the CII, or the PFS, Personal Finance Society, or you might come across the lesser known Certified Financial Planner designation, which is through the CISI. Okay, these are a tough commitment. To give you a bit of qualification background on financial services, to be a financial advisor, to see a client, you need to have passed what's known as the diploma. The diploma is at the NVQ standard level 4. To achieve chartered is level 6, which is akin to becoming a solicitor, for example. So this is a lot more effort for an individual. It's an indication of commitment to their cause, I would suggest, that they're willing to improve themselves and for the benefit, I hope, of their clients the other end. They don't have chartered. Is there anything else I might look for, Rob? You might say. Well, yes. In order to be chartered, an individual has to pass a number of advanced level qualifications. Some of those relate specifically, I'll give them an example here on the slide, to a specific subject matter. So, for example, if you were looking for an expert to assist you on pensions, you might be looking to see in their bio on their website, or you might ask them directly, do you hold the qualifications G60 or AF3? If you're an old financial planner like me, then it used to be called G60. If you're a young financial planner like Jack and Mike in my team, then they did AF3 instead, or they would be doing AF3 instead. So you'd want to be seeing that on their CV. The last of these options, well, look, if I'm working in the divorce arena, it might be nice to see a resolution logo on their website footer, because that definitely shows a commitment to the subject matter. And you can see the two different logos there. We've already covered off that there's not a huge amount of specialists in the country, but naturally, if you were looking for an expert in this field and you saw that specialist logo sitting there, then you managed to locate yourself one of the 33 limited number of people in the country. So hopefully that's a useful couple of slides, what to look for, some of the terminology that you might see, and the value adds, the extra bits that you might like to see from an advisor if you're working in, the evidence is they know a bit more about the divorce process. Okay. So the main body of the session here today is I'm going to focus on, I've kind of generalized the areas where a financial advisor might help into 3 sections. I've got the early stages, I've got the mid process, and then I've got rebuilding them afterwards. In other words, divorce has gone through, how do we help them moving forwards? Okay. Before I go too deep into that, I wanted to share this with you. I worked with a solicitor a fair number of years ago, based in London, and I know that particular firm would give out to their new instructions a lovely little booklet that talked through separation, maybe some of the feelings they might have, how to deal with money, how to deal with the family, etc., etc. And one of the things that instantly jumped out to me there was reference to the Kubler-Ross change curve, or the sometimes called the Kubler-Ross grief cycle. And I think it's really important, not least because a lot of the things that we do for our clients have an eye towards helping people through this cycle as quickly as possible. And we'll touch on some of those a bit later. To just quickly wander through the graph, before divorce, before a grief event has occurred, we've got normal functioning. Everything feels really great. Then an issue occurs. In this case, we're maybe saying separation. And in those early days, we might see from our clients, we see denial, avoidance, confusion, fear, shock, which morphs into anger, frustration, irritation, anxiety. Depression follows next. And at that deepest point in the curve here, eventually there comes this, okay, well, but I want the house. Bargaining starts to occur. They reach out to others. It might be at this point they reach out to the solicitor. It might be at this point they reach out to us, for example. They go through bargaining, and then we get to acceptance. What can I do? How do I move on? And then finally we get back to meaningful life. Naturally, what we think needs to occur is we want to try and get through that cycle as quickly as possible. And we definitely believe here that we can assist in this process to try and get through this. And I think you guys can, as solicitors and mediators as well. However, we think there can be a blockage here from time to time. In fact, we think that it might corkscrew, okay, which is they kind of get to it, and then it's, oh no, you can't have the house, or you can't have that pension, or you can't do this, or no, I definitely want the dog. Those kind of points, and it cycles back down again, depression, and those it circles round. The reason why I wanted to include the Kubler-Ross, it might resonate with you a little bit. You might see that in your discussions with your clients. We definitely see it at the various touch points we might have for a separating couple. Anyway, with that as a context, I move on to the early stages. I put in there initial scoping review. We've got many examples here, either with individuals approaching us directly, or I can even recall one particular firm where we used to attend their offices on the second or third meeting that they had with their client, with the intent of helping to extract a lot more information, some of those soft facts, soft details from that individual. Naturally, a financial planner in our normal day job, and obviously for Blue Sky, normal includes helping separating individuals, but in our normal day job as financial planners, it's one of our skill sets to sit there, to listen, to probe away with questions, to help extract what needs an individual might have, what wants they might have, if they've got biases that they're bringing to the table, to which obviously in this instance, that value add of being an expert in the field of separation and divorce, it's a natural value add for us here, in that if we hear a bias around how an asset might be split, or that a pension might be split, for example, then we can delicately bring that bias to the fore and perhaps manage that slightly. We can extract fears. I can recall we had a rather interesting week. I think it wasn't last November, the November before. I had 3 separate gentlemen who all made contact in that same week, pretty much with the same spec. My wife has just told me she's leaving me. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how my finance is going to run out. I don't know how I'm going to live financially afterwards, and all of those bits and bobs. So we can be there at that early stage to have a good listen around what their fears might be. We can't necessarily make them go away, but we can certainly listen to them. Sometimes we can manage some of those biases, but ultimately we can report back to the solicitor, or maybe slightly different in a mediation case. I've got some slides coming up on mediation in a minute, but certainly where the solicitor said, can you come in and see my client and help out maybe with some initial scoping, we can report back to that solicitor on the general direction of flow or thought processes at that time. As I move on to the next slide, I'm just taking a sort of a sideways step before I move on to some of the other things that might be of use and at the initial stage, and that's relating to cash flow modelling. Now, at Blue Sky, we are massive advocates of using cash flow modelling. I've got some screenshots coming up, by the way. It's particularly visual. It helps somebody see in nice pictures where things may or may not be heading, which is much easier to see than a spreadsheet, particularly for a huge chunk of society who hate looking at spreadsheets. They'd rather see a nice picture that tells them they're going to be in a good place or not. This next point, so I think it's a point probably originates from Jeremy here, which I think is a valid point. If we're dealing with a couple, we might be able to demonstrate a life that looks fantastic as they move forward. It's quite often the case that when they separate, we don't end up with 2 perfect lifestyles, because the finances have had to have been split to finance 2 separate lifestyles. But either way, we're able to do that. Cash flow also presents a really great way of road testing potential settlements that might have come up, that you might have discussed with your client, or that might have come up in mediation. How about if this happened? How about if that happened? We can role play it using the software to have a look. Going back to my 3 gentlemen that made contact, I certainly recall the soundbite from one of them. I'm going to lose 50% of everything. I'm not going to be able to cope. And we talked that through. And you know, I remember saying to him at the time, "Do you know that to be a fact?" "Well, I don't." "Okay, so why don't we plug your finances into our cash flow software and role play this just to actually understand if the position is as bad as you first see it." So that perhaps calming, well, it was meant in a calming fashion, that calming fashion of bringing that to the fore. I know particularly with that case, that individual is a client of ours on an ongoing basis. Those early days of visualization rather than fear of the unknown, cash flow can really be great in assisting in that particular way. Okay, right, let's briefly give you a bit of a graph on cash flow, because I've talked about it. Let's have a quick nosy. Now, what I would say, and certainly those firms where we have been into their offices and done sessions maybe a bit like this, but on a much smaller basis, we would actually have used the live software, which is obviously a darn sight more interactive than a static picture like you're seeing here. But let's go through this picture super quickly. What we have on the left-hand side is that we have the current age of the individual. In this case, the person is 56. It's probably very small on your screen, but the person is 56. And we've run the model all the way along the bottom axis to age 100. Each one of the bars going up from the bottom vertically upwards represents an individual's year in their life. We can see some pretty colors in this particular one. We've got the shade of blue that's on the left-hand side of the graph, and that represents that this individual is at work, okay, and they're employed. And we can see that that blue goes to very light blue. I can tell you that's occurring at age 65. That person has stopped working. And by stopping working, they don't have the income coming in to meet their expenditure. And the model in this instance is saying, well, you're going to use your cash reserves and your investments to fund your lifestyle until age 67, when the dark blue state pension kicks in, and you can start eating from your pension funds, denoted by orange. In this particular instance, though, when that pension fund has run out, there is no longer sufficient assets in this model to meet this individual's lifestyle. And at that point, we see on the right-hand side the emergence of red in the cash flow model. That highlights that there isn't any more cash funds, there's no more investments, no ISAs, there's no more pension fund. Yes, there's a state pension kicking in, but it's not sufficient to meet expenditure. And expenditure on this graph is denoted by the black line that is wiggling its way from the left-hand side of the graph all the way through to the right-hand side of the graph. So at a high level, that is a visual representation of someone's life. And as financial planners, we'd look at that and we can then start working with the individual to say, okay, right, so we know we're going to run out of money. And in this graph, it's about age 87. Where might we put compromises in place so that that red can reduce or disappear entirely? Okay, hopefully you got that. It can be, I can rest assured I can make that tremendously complex. We could run an entire session on cash flow, but hopefully that basic explanation got you some of the way. Here's an example. I think this was the case that Jeremy took on. In this particular case, we've got a bit of a spec at the top there. The wife is age 60, she's a teacher. She's renting at the moment. She's moved out of the former marital home. No financial agreement has been put in place at the moment. And she spends £25,000 per year. And every so often she buys a car. And we can see that every few years, as denoted by the box called car purchase, she goes and buys a new car. Now, we can see already that this model goes red at 66. So at a very first stage, without any form of debate around pension shares or getting a degree of equity from the family home, there's going to be a problem, and pretty quickly. In essence, once this person has stopped working, there's not sufficient assets to meet expenditure. So we're going to come back to this case as we work through some of my slides. because there's the stress testing of a potential settlement that can then be added to this cash flow to see progression and hopefully get to a better place. Okay, back to my early stages guide. I think another area where having a financial expert financial advisor that's going to bring some value to you potentially is the completion of the Form E, the data gathering. Now, naturally, if we, for example, had just done cash flow work for a client, we already hold a huge chunk of the information that could assist in the completion of a Form E. And of course, what we can also flag at this point is maybe we could highlight that there was an issue that was existing around a particular pension fund that the person's got. We can relay that back to you as solicitors or mediators. Ditto if there's any issues on the investments. It doesn't just have to be pensions. You know, a financial planner, and I'm going to say this is another value add item, a resolution related financial planner knows what they're looking for when they're looking at the savings, the investments, the pensions, maybe the mortgages. Yeah, that's quite useful. It might be maybe in a mediation environment that perhaps we might act as the financial neutral, and we might help both parties complete their Form Es, possibly. Okay. I think it probably stands to reason that if we're assisting on things like Form Es, we might be able to signpost to you financial abuse. I suppose there are other things that we might be able to signpost that we might see if we, for example, picked up a vibe about maybe any other, I guess, personal abuses, those kind of things. We can signpost those back to you. Maybe we might find something that looks just so tremendously complex about the income streams that maybe we might maybe re-endorse something that you'd feared, or highlight to you, look, I think you need maybe to get a forensic accountant on board as well. But either way, sharing the that early stage process might extract some examples of abuse that we can certainly pop our hands up and signpost for you. Moving on to the mid part of the process, a quick point on mediation here. Now, you know, at the midpoint, naturally we could assist in the capacity as a financial neutral. And I would suggest that an expert, once again, a value add here, you're going to be looking for resolution logos, I would say, but the value add here is that you're seeking expert advice, preferably from someone that knows the subject matter, of course, an objective opinion. We talked earlier on, or I talked earlier on, about biases. This is another place with which to maybe work on those biases. And naturally, I think the expertise that we've seen as we bring that we bring to a mediation piece can often help with reducing conflict as well. Naturally, someone that knows their subject matter, again, you would expect potentially to bring in an expert into a mediation. If there were pensions, naturally, you know us for pensions, but it could be investments, it could be protection, life assurance policies. It could be to talk around mortgage and debt management, taxation I put down on the list there, and of course cash flow can work quite nicely as well. Something that I think we'd certainly like here at Blue Sky to do a bit more of, and we've had some examples of this, is letting some of our rooms become available here, our meeting rooms here, become available so that a mediator may run a session in our offices in the comfort that actually if the session goes down the angle of perhaps needing some expert opinion, that perhaps it gives the ability then, because we're on site, to come into the meeting and provide some guidance at that point. And I can see that that has some merit. Doesn't mean it necessarily has to be in our offices. Mediation can exist in your offices or some other neutral location. I have included here, and it's not something that we do, I'll make that nice and clear, also at the mid-process, mid part of the process, it's not unusual that you're going to want a mortgage capacity report if mortgages are still on the agenda and house purchasing is on the agenda. To be very clear, to reiterate it for a second time, it's definitely not something that Blue Sky does anymore. We certainly used to do it, but certainly you want to do that. And actually, just the crib note to myself, I've put a few little notes in my presentation here of best practice around this. I'm sure lots of you are already doing this, but it is so important in those early stages to emphasize to your client about the importance of maintaining their debt commitments. Remember, a missed mortgage payment will likely ruin both parties' credit files and the chance of getting that new mortgage or loans. Could even go down to the effect of jeopardizing the ability to get utilities in the same fashion. Mobile phones, Next catalogs, all of those kind of things can be impacted just by a dark moment of, oh, I'm not going to pay the mortgage, I'm not going to pay that loan payment. So don't forget to include that in your early day discussions with clients when they talk to you about the mortgage debt or loan debt. Look, this is common ground for us. Another mid-process point is I need a pension sharing report. We, of course, at Blue Sky are PODs, pensions on divorce experts. Of course, we are doing those, as I mentioned earlier. At the resolution conference, it was quite evident that not many of the attendees were doing pension sharing reports that were financial advisors. So that's useful, and I don't intend going into pension sharing reports in any great depth. We did the 2 prior sessions to today, which I think Jeremy's already mentioned, are available on the website on YouTube. So if you want to know more about pension sharing reports, head over to there and they'll be there waiting for you. Okay, construction of pension letters of instruction. Once again, there's some examples on the website. In fact, that document there is on the website. For us, this is a daily occurrence in our office. We get in pension sharing instructions day in, day out, and we also help solicitors on writing pension sharing letters of instructions. If in doubt of what to say, even if you're not instructing us, in fact, possibly if you're not instructing us, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't ask us for some assistance on the construction of a pension letter of instruction, but do so. We certainly know a good one when we see one, as in fact, we know a bad one when we see one. Certainly if Blue Sky is involved and we are the experts that are being asked to do the pension sharing report and we see ambiguity or issues around a letter of instruction, our tendency is to try and arrange a 3-way Teams meeting to iron out the ambiguity with you so that you get the best value out of your pension sharing report. Another mid-process point is shadow expert work. In this instance, I might perhaps just focus on pension sharing reports. We're pretty proud of how our pension sharing reports turn out, and I'm very pleased to say that we get lots of very positive feedback on how readable they are. But at the same point, we're conscious that we're not the only provider of pension sharing reports, and we are, however, regularly asked to critique or even explain another expert's report. I would say that we've got such a volume of knowing the other providers' reports that generally speaking, we can probably decipher another provider's reports in 10, 20, 30 minutes. It's not an uncommon soundbite that we might have a solicitor that says, is there any way you could call my client or have a Teams meeting with my client to explain the pension sharing report that they have received? And we're certainly happy to do that. I should also go on to say it's also pretty common that the solicitor will finish the question with, oh, and can I be in the meeting as well, because I don't quite understand the report myself, all of which is fine. We're more than happy to provide that, and like I say, we can generally get to the nub of what the report is trying to say extremely quickly. Next slide. Stress testing potential settlements. I think if I've kept your attention so far, you know that I've got more on cash flow coming. And here we go. Okay, and a quick reminder with the cash flow is a great way of accelerating someone through that Kubler-Ross grief cycle. It's stress testing outcomes, which is giving a very quick and visual response. So look, back to the one in question here. This case of Jeremy's has had a couple of subtle changes applied to the original graph. And you might recall the original graph had the red arriving in the model at age, I think it was 65 or 66, when this person had retired. This particular settlement offer is that there's a £250,000 pension share coming the way of the wife. Actually, the former marital home is going to be sold, and there's £400,000 worth of equity that's coming the wife's way. And as you can see from the title of the slide, she would very much like to purchase a property. It's also come about in the session with Jeremy that actually she thinks she spends a bit more than she previously told us. First thing to notice, that great big spike around about age 62, it's on the left-hand side. That is denoting, actually I can tell you that that spike goes right out the top of your screen. It's been capped for the purpose of this slide. That denotes that there was a very expensive capital purchase that year, the purchase of a house. Okay, either way, we can see the pension share has assisted make red disappear a little bit more, but it's still there, and it's there in the early 80s. Which leads to another test. What if there was a bit more cash and a bit more pension share? Okay, that maybe can make red disappear a bit more. What if I got even more pension share and I still bought the house? Okay, you kind of get the trend I'm trying to highlight here. The final answer in this particular case was, look, we're going to buy a house in the short term. You've got the pension share you're going to get, but you probably don't need the house of that size at some point later on in life. And you can see there a nice little tag that's saying, well, let's downsize. And we, at this point, have selected age 85 as a period to downsize. How does that help the model not go red? You might think, well, if you downsize, you've released equity. That equity has then been placed within the cash flow modeling software. And of course, if you've got cash there, it means you've got the ability to pay your bills just that little bit longer. Okay, so an example of stress testing there. Next slide from me, a couple of other mid-process points. Look, I guess another value add of having a resolution member or accredited specialist is that they are worldly in, and their knowledge is continually updated in the world that we see ourselves in. And they're able to apply that context. They may be able to speak to that client when they say, well, I understand that transfer values are dropping on final salary pension schemes. I'm going to be getting a pension share on that. What does that do to me? Or lifetime allowance, apparently it's being removed according to the most recent budget. So mid-process wise, whether it's you or your client, it's well worth reaching out to someone who is specialist in this field for further information. Another mid-process point, pension sharing annex completions. Now, of course, we're quite sensitive to this because, of course, we are often asked to assist with pension sharing implementation, but B, we also hear where it goes wrong. In fact, with Blue Sky's pension sharing reports, we make a point at the back of the report of highlighting the pension provider that you should put into the PSA and maybe even the indicative share, but double check it's right. If in doubt, share it. Let us have a look. Just mindful of the time, consider payment of fee and consider token share. Look, I've had a case that's been hanging around now for, it must be 18 months, if not longer. We were asked to assist with the pension sharing implementation. The husband has not paid his share of the fee, and one could argue, therefore, is imparting influence. Still, a pension share couldn't be done. Now, what I've got to consider payment of fee is, if you know or suspect there might be an issue with one party post-divorce, then maybe when it comes to the section in the PSA that says who's going to be sharing the fees, make it all in favour of the client who's going to receive the pension credit. So if the wife's going to receive the pension share, she ends up having to pay 100% of the pension sharing cost. You could maybe make adjustments then in maybe the distribution of the cash reserves or another asset to deal with it. I won't cover token share for the time being. I'm mindful of how I'm doing against time, but I might come back to that another time. Last point on the mid-process. Let's go through those slides. An expert in this field, of course, is likely to know about investments, tax planning, although maybe a slight rider there. If you've got yourself a chartered financial planner, in being chartered, they will have had to have passed some degree of taxation exams. But there's probably a time and a place where an accountant might offer a more precise skill set. But either way, a financial planner, certainly a chartered one, is going to be worldly enough on tax. They're also going to be able to know when it's exceeded their knowledge point and can signpost in favour of an accountant. Occasionally, I've put generating a specific income. Occasionally we get involved in higher value cases, or maybe there's no pensions. And the question that we're posed is, the wife requires an income of X. How much money is needed to achieve that? So I'm just trying to give you a flavour here of mid-process questions. Okay, we've gone through all those mid-process points. Great news, the decree absolute gone off to the court. Job done, hey? Not quite. And in fact, the PAG report even references this. When can I close the file? Do not close the file until you're certain. Anyway, I'm not going to read the slide verbatim, but you can see it specifically referenced there. There is an indication, therefore, that you need to be sure that your the implementation has occurred. Before I really dig into the rebuilding process, and the good news for you is there's not too many more slides to go, I just thought I'd bring back one of my favourites from today's session, the Kubler-Ross. Because at this point, it looks like we've gone through acceptance, we've returned to meaningful life, it is time to rebuild. The trough, the anger, the depression, the bargaining, it's gone. It's job done, isn't it? And I would say, yeah, but be careful. From our perspective of advisors who are working on that rebuilding phase, we're still dealing with the emotional unpacking of the journey that individual has gone through. So certainly from an advisor perspective, you want to make sure that you've certainly vetted your advisor, you're happy that they've got empathy for the problem, they understand it. I would also say another area that we're always mindful on is pre-divorce, who looked after the money? Because it's often in the case that one person looks after the money and the other one does other roles in the relationship. But if we're dealing with the individual that genuinely had no real focus on dealing with money, then I think this is a really careful point. And we certainly look to extract an understanding of how good they are with money at the earliest stage when we're working on the rebuilding phase of separation. Who was the money person? Okay, for many, rebuilding is surely just finding a home for the pension share. Yep, so certainly I'm sure there's lots of advisors out there that would love to get involved in that with you. However, I would also say you still should be looking for an expert in this field. I've got a case, it happens to be the same case I gave you an example of earlier on. I've got a case, as I said, that's been dragging for a couple of years. One of the other problems we've had with that case is that the pension scheme is insisting, despite having a court order, on specific discharge forms before they'll allow the transfer to go. A point to which I've got extremely shirty with them, and actually there are two schemes. I've got my way on one and they have overridden it, but I was heartened to see that there was a recent case that went through FOS, the Financial Ombudsman's service, where they saw in favour of the client against the pension scheme for insisting on their own formwork to be completed when they were effectively holding the ultimate trump card, namely a pension sharing annex. So I do think that even in the pension share and finding a home phase of rebuilding, probably still makes sense to have an expert at hand, because they know when a pension provider is trying to perhaps pull a fast one. So useful there. For us, I'm not going to talk too much about cash flow again. For us, if we're working with a client post divorce, we will make a point, as we do with every single client that engages with Blue Sky, in that they will have a cash flow model. Because we so passionately believe that if we can visualize the future, we can manage expectation for that individual. So yes, we'll do pension sharing implementations, but we will always do a cash flow model as well to help the individual have context to move on. I've had discussions with clients about going back into employment, what kind of salaries they might lead. You know, so the conversation develops across the board. For Blue Sky, if we're looking after a client, I think this is another point, by the way, that you might want to raise if you're going to work with a third party is, once the pension share has been implemented, what happens next? For us, we review. Our clients, we touch base with yearly, their cash flows are updated 1 year down the line. What changed in their life? Did the markets fall? Did their health become worse? Did they end up with a massive expenditure item? So we're there and we incrementally top it up so that there's no nasty surprises, or if there is a nasty surprise, at least we're able to work with them on managing that way through it. Okay, I think we're definitely on the home stretch now. A quick summary. At the early stage, certainly scoping, cash flow is going to come in useful for me, completion, financial abuse, and keeping an eye for that. At the mid-process point, working with mediators, pretty straightforward for us. Mortgage capacity, obviously, as I said, not one for us, but is something that you might require help with. Pension sharing reports, obviously a strength for us. Letters of instruction, obviously a strength for us because we've seen them all, I guess. Shadow expert work, having the expert in your pocket if you're a solicitor. Obviously, you wouldn't necessarily go for a shadow expert in the scope of mediation. Settlement stress testing, using my favorite, as I know you know, cash flow, and using the knowledge and expertise of someone that's in the field and regularly gets involved in the separation process is definitely an area there. Rebuilding phase, naturally you're going to want help in terms of finding a home for that pension share, helping that individual to bring to life what it is they're wanting to do as they move on from what will no doubt have been a very difficult saga for them. And certainly I would say, if you're working with a partner, ask what happens next. You know, implementing a pension share should not be a once only transaction, in our opinion. There might be occasions maybe where that might make some sense, maybe if the individual is a bit younger. But I think couple that with the fact that so frequently we come across a need to help with pension sharing for an individual who didn't look after the finances. Regular review is of paramount importance. Right, well, great news for you is that I've reached the end of my my presentation as it is. I might just ask out to my team, does anybody have any questions that they'd like me to try and answer? Jeremy.
Hi, Rob. Thanks very much for that. Look, that was a really useful session, I felt, and has provoked hopefully some thought in you all about how somebody like Blue Sky could assist in future cases. Just looking at the Q&A, we've had a few questions along the way. Don't have any questions at the moment, although one might have just popped in there. So let's have a look. No, that's from Michael, just to say very helpful. Many thanks. So thanks for attending, Michael. Really appreciate your time today, as we do everybody else's. So well done, Rob, for that. That completes our spring series of webinars, but the bad news is that we're going to be back in the autumn with some more webinars. Currently our thoughts are that we will do a session on PAG 2, which is coming along pretty quickly. We're also going to do a pensions basics masterclass. I know that some of you are a little bit scared, for want of a better expression, as far as pensions are concerned, and we're going to try and strip it right down and help you understand pensions and the implications for pension sharing reports. We've also got a few other ideas kicking around, things that we might do, but your responses to our survey will help us drive the direction of those future webinars. There is a link. It's in the chat function, not the Q&A function as advertised previously. So if you wouldn't mind just spending 2 minutes just clicking through that survey, it's a really quick thing to do. It won't take you long. It gives us some really good feedback on how you felt about the session. It also helps us shape future presentations to you all. And on that point, look, we have worked with solicitors and mediators for a number of years now. And one of the great things about post-COVID world is that we're able to come back into your offices and talk to you and do some training on pensions. Look, that can be formal. We can do a presentation to the broader team, or we can come in and have a coffee and a chat and just kind of in a fairly relaxed environment, just chew the fat a bit about pensions and the challenges that you are having at the moment and the things that you'd like to understand a bit more about. So if that's of interest to you, just reach out, get in contact, happy to do that. And I think the final thing I'd like to say is that, you know, these sessions do take quite a bit of work to put together, as I'm sure you understand and appreciate. And there's been a few people in the background here at Blue Sky that I'd like to thank. In particular, Neil, who was our PowerPoint guru and has spent many hours putting together these slides, which is a godsend for Rob, because if you don't know anything about Rob, Rob absolutely hates PowerPoint. So Neil has done an absolutely cracking job on that. And once again, thanks everybody for your time today. We really do appreciate you taking the time out of your diaries. Look, there's loads of information on the Blue Sky website. I think we're pretty friendly, helpful guys here at Blue Sky. So if there's anything pensions, divorce related, just pick up the phone, drop us an email, and we'll do our best to help. But thanks everybody for turning up today. Much appreciated. And if we don't see you before, we'll see you in the autumn.